All right, guys, happy Thursday, especially happy Thursday to me because it's Black History Month. So you guys just have to adore me and love me so much because I am Black, and that's what this month means. Today on the show, we're going to be discussing Russell Brand. What do you guys think? Are you believing in this redemption arc? He's saying that he's exploring Christianity. Is this some bizarre PR move, or is it real? Plus, we're going to be talking about E. Jean Carroll. She's the lady that just won $83 million in a defamation lawsuit against Trump. You don't have to like Donald Trump, but I got to ask you, do you like E. Jean Carroll? Lastly, we'll be talking about Ice Cube, the rapper, and I want to say he is not suicidal because in a video, he is talking about how the record company executives also funded and pushed the creation of gangster rap in the 1980s as a form of weaponized culture. And I think that might land him in some hot water because you can't just be talking that much truth. All that and more today coming up on Candace Owens. Russell Brand, very interesting celebrity. If you guys are not familiar with Russell Brand, then that means you didn't see Forgetting Sarah Marshall. That was an absolutely great movie. But he's also known because he was very briefly married to Katy Perry. He's been in tons of other films. And now he's been in the press a lot because he's moved away from Hollywood and he is just talking about a lot of political issues. Obviously, he is an Englishman. And among other things, we know that as he was coming up in Hollywood and as he was growing up, he had a lot of issues. He talked about the fact that he developed bulimia when he was just 16 years old. By the time he was 19, he was addicted to not just heroin, but other drugs. But his main addiction was heroin. But he also lists amphetamines, LSD, ecstasy. And despite having all of these problems, Hollywood still loved him. They adored him and they protected him because that's what Hollywood is about. I do have this operating theory that they particularly like you if you are in addictions because then they can control you and then they can just hold on to stories that they know about you and use it as blackmail. But I'm not going to go deep into conspiracy land here because I'd rather just stick with Russell Brand and this sort of redemption arc that he's been on because I find it to be remarkably curious. So quick story, I actually met Russell Brand years ago, almost like 5 to 6 years ago now. They reached out to me to come on his podcast, Under the Skin. And at this time, Russell Brand was a committed socialist. He was in the streets of the UK protesting for every other political cause. And I didn't know what to expect sitting down with him, but I at least knew that despite the fact that he was presenting as a leftist, he wasn't one because he was willing to have a conversation with me. And I obviously was somebody who was being recognized as a Black Trump supporter. How dare this woman support Trump? How dare she be a conservative when she is Black? And we had a remarkable conversation. Honestly, it went on for 2 hours. I'm going to show you a very brief segment of it. We're both very energized because this was almost 2 hours into the discussion. A socialist sitting down with a Trump supporter capitalist. It was tons of fun. Here is just a brief listen.
These are times when the old divides, and the old polarities are starting to dissolve. While we feel like people are becoming more and more opposed to each other, I think we're becoming closer and closer to rejecting the systems that oppress us, not just economically. These are the crumbs. I'm talking about spiritually, preventing people from realizing their potential. So I do believe in the power of previously oppressed people, but I think as an individual, I wouldn't like to continue to revel in my misery. Oh, this happened.
That's what people want to do.
People do need to progress. But to deny something as historically scarring.
I didn't live through slavery, so why would I be scarred by that?
Well, there is some evidence to suggest that there is a hereditary trauma. I mean, even psychological.
Sounds like it was written by a leftist professor, probably at Cambridge.
Because, the same way that we evolve features, we evolve emotionally. And something as recent as that.
That is so ridiculous. Everybody feels like everyone has been a slave at some point. There was slavery here, too.
Yeah, but
there was slavery
I know that.
on
I'm not saying England's great.
I
know what.
So did you feel your slavery pain the other week?
I'm from Essex.
So you can see we're really enjoying each other despite the fact that we disagree. And one of the things that I walked away from this conversation recognizing was he kept trying to pry. He kept wanting to talk about, my childhood, my traumas, to understand what could have possibly brought me to where I am in life. And I walked away thinking that Russell Brand is actually not a person that is a leftist or is a socialist, but rather he is using that because he wants to absolve some guilt that he holds because he was allowed right? To be really an awful person, a person that was addicted to sex, addicted to drugs, and still hailed as a hero by the media and the press for years. I sensed that he felt guilty for his success, and he was trying to rinse it off of himself via all of these protests. But I knew that eventually he was going to come to sense, because Russell Brand is incredibly intelligent, and there was no way that he was going to keep holding on to these ideas, these leftist principles. And as it tends to be, at least in my own personal experience, I do find that a lot of these leftists are bad people. It's a way for them not to acknowledge what's happening on the inside. I'm not talking about liberals, I'm talking about leftists, these radicals who are on the street, pink hair, screaming at you, yelling. It allows them not to have to engage with themselves, and instead to offset all of that externally, to say, oh, well, look what's going on over here. I'm not a bad person. Don't even look at me. Isn't it horrible that women have no control over their bodies, what the Supreme Court is doing? They don't care about those actual causes. They just want to feel like they're doing good because they are potentially not actually good people. They don't want to do the real work, the internal work. And so it's interesting to see Russell Brand come over and recognize that perhaps that former self of him was doing just that. And what changed? Well, I think what represented a sea change for him was the one thing that socialists hate, the concept of family. Russell Brand got married and he had children, and something shifted inside of him. Take a listen to him talking to Tucker Carlson.
I went into the entertainment industry really with the giddy trajectory that propels a lot of people into those spaces, believing that there might be some fulfillment, and certainly there would be excitement. And when I was a denizen of that world, I was fostered and adored and celebrated and facilitated and lived the kind of lifestyle which I think is kind of common for people in that area, for single people, in my case, drug and alcohol free, but certainly with an appetite for a promiscuous lifestyle. When I was part of it, I found it empty and unfulfilling, of course, as it would be, as anyone who's had those kind of experiences ultimately realizes. When I departed it, as a result really of various spiritual crises or commercial failures or a combination of those events, I really felt like a coming home to the type of values that I grew up with. I grew up in a normal blue-collar town, Grays, kind of like a place that's like New Jersey, I guess, a kind of suburban, outside of the city, normal people, good values kind of place. And what I feel like happened is, like, well, since I've had a family, since I've got a young son, I've got a couple of daughters, is I feel like that I was able to deploy the skills learned through working in entertainment as a man in recovery in a new space. And what simply began with myself and my partners is tell the truth about things you care about.
I also want to mention here that he's now been sober for 19 years. And as I said, he's married. He has, I think, 3 children now, actually. And he's talking in that clip about home, and he's talking about family. And I talk about these topics on my podcast because it's so crucial in really defeating so much of the evil that we see in society, for people to aspire to these sorts of things. People don't like to hear that sometimes. Oh, you don't have to have a family to be a good person. Well, there is a reason why Karl Marx, who you could argue one of the most successful philosophers ever, he is the most successful philosopher. He's in terms of having his ideas implemented in society, why he wrote so excitedly against the concept of family, not just the Communist Manifesto, but all of his other works too. It became a tenet of the government. If the government wishes to grow and supersede individuals and supersede families, we need to make the nuclear family look bad, because they knew that what it would produce if you don't aspire to family, if you don't aspire to children, is a fundamentally selfish individual, and an individual that is willing to get into this almost intimate relationship with the government. They don't believe in God. They're atheists. They believe in more governance as a solution to everything. Everything is temporal. Everything is instantaneous and in the moment. And so it's interesting that as Russell Brand moves away from his socialist and communist radical leaning past and moves toward family, he is now also talking about faith. Listen to what he said about why he has begun wearing a cross and reading the Bible.
The reason I wear a cross is because Christianity, and in particular the figure of Christ, are, it seems to me, inevitably becoming more important as I become more familiar with suffering, purpose, self, and not self. Reading the Bible a lot more, and as I've told you before, I'm reading Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life. When I grew up, Christianity seemed like it was either really irrelevant and old-fashioned and sort of dusty and sort of incense and sort of Honor Domine, or they tried to modernise it and it seems just like, right, okay, we're going to talk about Jesus. And like both of those routes seem like, I don't know if there's anything for me. And I suppose it takes a certain amount of adulthood, and it might be different for all of us. For me, it seems that it's taken quite a lot to recognise that I need a personal relationship with God. It occurred to me that if instead of always talking to myself inwardly, I could replace one of those voices with an indwelling God. It says in Galatians, it is our job to die so that as Christ died on the cross, he might be reborn in us.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media, who absolutely adored him when he was deep in his addictions, hates him. Really think about that. And I will tell you, I am a big believer that Hollywood was created by the CIA. I believe that. I firmly believe that. You can say that's a conspiracy theory. When I think about all of the societal ills, when I think about how they artificially place people at the top of Hollywood who are preaching toxic principles, routinely anti-family principles, now definitively satanic principles, it just should make you pause and wonder, why is that? Why is that? Why do they reject someone like Russell Brand when he's coming up and recognizing that family and faith is turning him into a good person, and yet adore individuals as they're deep in their addictions? I'm just going to leave you guys with that thought. And that's all I'm going to say on that topic. You've probably heard by now that you should be using a VPN when you connect to the internet. But if you're like me, adding an extra step to anything you do every day just sounds like a hassle. If you knew how easy it is to protect your connection with ExpressVPN, you would be doing it already. ExpressVPN is the easiest way to browse safely and securely. ExpressVPN gets rid of all of those pesky things that you hate about VPNs and does it right. Other VPNs slow down your connection to the point where it's not even worth it to connect. But ExpressVPN doesn't lag or buffer. You can stream in HD with no issues. And using it couldn't be easier. You just open the ExpressVPN app, click one button, and enjoy instant protection across all of your devices. The fact is, once you connect to ExpressVPN, you don't even realize that you have it on. Your connection is secure and your data becomes encrypted. No wonder it's been called the best VPN by Business Insider and TechRadar. Right now, go to expressvpn.com/Candace and you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/Candace to get 3 extra months of ExpressVPN. expressvpn.com/Candace. Okay, now it's time for some topics du jour. But before we get into our first topic, I want to remind you to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are on the road to 3 million subscribers. Man, a lot of articles were written about me in my review of Ice Spice's song, You Think You the Fart. I didn't expect that review to go so viral. Most people agreed with my assessment that obviously music has fallen. I grew up listening to The Temptations. Lauryn Hill produced one of the greatest albums of all time, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And now we have this young woman, nothing personal against her, but writing about farts, that you think you the fart, whatever the song is. We should probably pause and just wonder what we're doing here. What's the purpose of this? How it is that these sorts of individuals are winning awards at all. You should not be allowed to win an award for writing a song like this, or a song that's like WAP, which won many awards, and yet these songs routinely go viral. And I think, as I said in monologue today, that a lot of this is artificial. Something about this seems particularly evil, that Hollywood decides to say, we are going to make this person really relevant. I think about this even in terms of Lil Nas X. Suddenly he embraces Satan and they're like, oh my God, you're amazing. He's not the most talented individual, so why is he everywhere? Because he's being artificially pushed. Well, take a listen to this. This is Ice Cube. He's formerly a rapper, and this clip has been making the rounds because he appeared on Bill Maher. He is deeply respected, to talk about this intentional pushing of thug culture and what's actually behind it, or rather, who's behind it. Take a listen.
Let's take rap music.
Let's take it.
Same people who own the labels own the prisons. So
Literally the same people?
literally the same people who own the labels own private prisons. The records that come out are really geared to push